Welcome into the Patriots Beat podcast here on the CLNS Media Podcast Network and on Patriots Press Pass. Evan Lazar, joined as always by Alex Barth. And today, July 5th, the day after July 4th, I think we're all dragging through the day a little bit today. I like the July 4th, Alex, when you get the 5th off, right? Like what happened to that July 4th? Let's go back to that holiday weekend style, whereas this time around, it was like yesterday was like Sunday, right? You know, you had to get up and work today. It was kind of a bummer, but hey, listen, it's good.
Well, you might have treated it like that. I certainly did not. So I apologize. I'm a little groggy today.
That's true. That's true. Alex and I were together on Nantasket Beach in Hull yesterday, and I had to drive home at a certain point, so I wasn't quite as partaking quite as much in the festivities, let's say that, as some of the other people at the event there yesterday, but it was fun. We had a blast. Now we're going to talk some Patriots, and exactly 3 weeks from today, 3 weeks on the dot, veterans have to report to training camp at Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, and 3 weeks from tomorrow, believe it or not, first day of training camp, July 27th. It's basically here. I mean, look, 3 weeks is not that much time, right? That's going to go by in a blink of an eye. And so the offseason is essentially over. We're wrapping it up. We're seeing players, more and more guys working out, posting on Instagram. I retweeted something, Jalen Mills. He was working with Jamar Chase, DeAndre Swift, and Leonard Fournette. I'm assuming they all have the same agent or something like that, manager, or some sort of connection there to bring those four guys together, kind of an odd group. But yeah, 3 weeks away from the first day of veterans reporting to training camp, 3 weeks and a day away from the first day of training camp. So at this point in the offseason, I always do my most important Patriots list every year, the top 10 players that are the most important to the team's success in the upcoming season. I like to use the Jenga analogy, right? You pull this piece from the block of Jenga pieces. Who makes the tower crash, right? Who's the one that is the most important? Obviously, Mac Jones is number one on everybody's list, as he should be. So we're going to look at 2 through 5-ish on this list. I've already published 6 through 10, so this is a little sneak peek for everybody that can go check out the written versions on clnsmedia.com. But a little sneak peek of 1 through 5 from me. But I also wanted to get Alex's opinion on his top 3 or 4 guys, other than Mac Jones, of course, on his most important Patriots list. So let's start with yours. Let's go, from the 4 to 1, right? I guess is the way to look at it. So number 4, who you got there?
Yeah, so number 4, I have David Andrews. I think that, and that's not necessarily as much an X and O's thing, but I think his crucial role is we saw last year early in the season when they had some new pieces on offense and a rookie quarterback, the communication was an absolute mess up front, and it created a lot of issues. Obviously, Mac has another year of experience under his belt, right? And that's big, but you're looking at potentially 4 new starters on the offensive line if you count, Wynn and Brown in new positions based on what we saw in the spring. That's not necessarily going to be an easy adjustment for anybody, for the linemen, for Mac, whoever. And David Andrews is that one returning starter. He's a captain. He's a guy who is a true communicator, who has always kind of taken that role as the center. You don't have an offense if you don't have an offensive line, plain and simple. And, if you want to say, is he the best offensive lineman? I think there's a case. I know some people might say Trent Brown, but he's the one making the calls. He's the one setting the protection, along with Mac, but he's the offensive lineman doing all of that. I think David Andrews is tremendously important to this season.
I had David Andrews at 7. You make a very compelling argument. He's certainly in that conversation for the top 5 most important players. I think the reason why I had him down the list just a little bit is because center inherently is not a premium position. So there are players, pass rushers, tackles, kind of tease what I have coming up ahead of him on the list. But
see, I don't do premium positions.
Everything that you said, though, is 100% spot on about David Andrews. His communication, his ability to set the mic points, get everybody to be pointed in the right direction. It's really a dance with the offensive line, and everybody has to be in sync. He's a major, major part of that. I also think that I'm not big into like the I guess the bravado or the get tough as nails types of guys or the grinders.
He's a tone setter. But he's a tone setter.
Absolutely a tone setter. comes in, lunch pail type of guy, every single day, grinds. Sundays, I think it was last year, right, where he stood up for Mac Jones after the play. He actually got a flag for it, but I don't think anybody minded, right? It was the exact type of thing that you want to see from somebody when your quarterback gets hit late after the whistle, to have your center or anybody else really stand up for your quarterback as instantly and as aggressively as David Andrews did. Exactly what you want. So I have no arguments with you having David Andrews that high whatsoever. My number 4 on my list is Christian Barmore. I don't know if you had him in your top 3 or not, Alex, but I just feel like if this defense is going to be able to succeed this year, and really I'm just looking for them to be above average, right? I think we can see on paper they're probably not a lockdown top 5, top 3 type of defense. But if in order for them to be an above average defense and stay afloat on that side of the ball against the Buffaloes of the world, they need Christian Barmore and the guy that I have at number 2 to wreak havoc in the pass rush. Those guys need to get after it, and they need to get after the quarterbacks, because they're not going to have J.C. Jackson and Stephon Gilmore in the secondary like they once did. So in order to mask some of those issues in the secondary, their most talented players in this defense arguably are the guys up front, like Barmore. So I had him at number 4. I'm not sure where you would have him on the list exactly.
I probably would have him 5 or 6. The reason I don't, and a lot of what you said is correct, and I'll get into mine. My 2 and 3 are kind of related.
Yeah.
The reason I don't have him as high is when we do this exercise, right? The most crucial players, I look a lot at usage rate. You know, how often is this guy on the field?
Sure.
That's why part of the reason I put David Andrews higher. Ideally, he's playing 100% of the snaps. Like, he's not coming off the field during the season. I think even at his best, Barmore's probably a 65, 70% usage rate guy. And that's nothing against him. That's just the nature of the position. So this is where, you know, premium position, I won't go off reputation, but he's going to be a rotational player. Whereas there's some other guys who you're looking at ideally 85% up. And I just think those guys are naturally a little more important, to use the term we're using to structure this list, just because they're on the field more. If you want to change it to impactful players or whatever, I might put Barmore differently. But I just, again, the usage rate just puts him a little lower on my list.
Yeah. My whole argument for Barmore being so high is that if this defense is going to be decent, they're going to need to get after the quarterback. And he's going to be,
right,
if not the biggest piece of that, the second biggest piece of that. So, all right. So who's number 3 on your list? If you want to relate it to number 2, go ahead.
Yeah, so 3 and 2 are related for me. 2 is Matthew Judon, and 3 is Jalen Mills. And the reasons why are they don't have much of a secondary, especially at the corner position. There's a ton of question marks there. Yep. And if they're going to be successful defensively with this secondary, they have to get to the quarterback. They have to get to the quarterback often. We saw last year how different the defense looked when Matthew Judon was on versus when he was off. Yeah. Judon getting to the quarterback is the whole thing. So that's why I have him at number 2, because I think the defense is going to go as Matthew Judon goes. The reason I have Jalen Mills behind him at number 3 is, well, if there are games where Matthew Judon gets neutralized, Jalen Mills is going to need to show you something. He's going to need to be a number 1 corner. If he can't be at least what he was last year, you hope he's improved in the second year in the system. But if he can't be at least what he was last year, there is a there's going to be a massive issue on the back level. And if you lose him, again, there's guys that maybe have some upside, right? I've been very complimentary of Jack Jones, and we'll see what he gives them. Malcolm Butler, if he can return to form his last full season, I think he's a competitive player, but those are question marks. Those guys are question marks. And if you lose Jalen Mills and you go just with those question marks, it could get ugly. It could get ugly at the cornerback position. So I have Mills 3. Ideally, Matthew Judon takes some of that pressure off, but he's not going to take it all off. You still need Jalen Mills to go out there and look like a number 1 corner.
So I had Jalen Mills at number 9, certainly in the top 10. But the reason why I had him a little bit lower than you is because I'm not actually sure there's a significant drop off from Jalen Mills to Terrence Mitchell and Malcolm Butler. Like,
there could be, though.
There could be in theory, but all those guys, maybe not Butler just because he had the year off and we don't know 100% what he is coming back. But Terrence Mitchell's tape last year, albeit in Houston, wasn't that far off from what Jalen Mills produced with the Patriots. So I look at it and say, if they have to go from Jalen Mills to Terrence Mitchell, are they really? It's not going from Steph Gilmore to Terrence Mitchell or JC to Terrence Mitchell, right? It's a little less of a gap there. So I kind of look at corner in a similar category as what I looked at as the wide receivers is that they are all interchangeable in some sort of way. And I don't know if Jalen Mills is one tier ahead, 2 tiers ahead, but I don't think he's at the top tier, and Terrence Mitchell and Malcolm Butler are at the bottom, right? So I think there's less of a drop off there, but I certainly had him at number 9, easily in my top 10, a very important player in this defense because he's the one guy out of that outside cornerback group in particular that you know what you're getting, right? You really don't know what you're getting from Malcolm Butler when he comes back. You really don't know if Terrence Mitchell is going to be a fit here. Jalen Mills, you have the tape from last year. You know exactly who he is. You know exactly who he's going to be for you next year. My number 3 on my list is Trent Brown. And it relates back to what I was saying about the drop-off. The issue that I have with this is that if first of all, last year when the Patriots had Trent Brown versus didn't have Trent Brown, it was similar to Judon being on and off, right? They were a different offense with Trent Brown in there last year. Secondly to that, if they don't have Trent Brown, then it probably means that Justin Herron is playing. Then you're elevating your backup behind Justin Herron. He's now the third guy, and so on and so forth. Trent Brown's health and his ability to stay on the field, and now especially that he's flipping over to left tackle again, most likely, a hugely important piece of this offense this year. And the numbers bear out. When you look at the numbers last year, just such a more efficient offense last year when they had Trent Brown on the field versus the games that he missed early on in the season. So I have Trent Brown at 3. I would assume if you did this list fully, Alex, you'd have Trent Brown somewhere on the list.
Yeah, of course. I'd have him on there. But again, I just think not the sum is the parts of the whole, something like that. I think David Andrews is the glue that holds the offensive line together. So that's why I have him at number 1. Again, if it's impactful players, if it's best players, if we're doing Madden ratings, I would probably have Trent Brown higher. But again, we're going that term important. I'm basing it off that. I'm putting David Andrews ahead of him. But those are the top 2 linemen, and then I think those are the only 2 that are really on the list. You could maybe say Michael Onwenu, but
those are the only 2 I had on the list. My number 2 is the same as you, Matthew Judon. When that defense was rolling last year, Matthew Judon was a huge part of it, not just on the field and his production on the field, which was great, but he was a leader of that defense when things were going right. And do you remember all of the cutaways after games, like him dancing off the field, all that? I know that stuff gets overrated sometimes or gets overplayed, I guess, by social media and things like that. But I do think that winning is contagious. And I think that he's one of those guys that has a lot of bravado. He's got a lot of pull in that locker room. And I just think on top of the fact that he's a good pass rusher, they need to figure out, I think with Judon, when teams sort of like they did in the second half of last year, he cooled off. Maybe his motor wasn't running as hot. Maybe he ran out of steam. I know he went through COVID, so maybe that was somewhat of a factor. But I think they need to, hopefully in year 2, allow him to move around a little bit more than he did last year. I think last year he was pretty much over the left tackle for over 70% of the snaps that he played, because I think he was learning the defense, right? It was year 1. He didn't necessarily have the entire package yet of the defense installed. Now that he does have a year under his belt, you would like to think that maybe he can move inside some to rush like over the guard, like they used to do with Dante Hightower, flip sides back and forth when they need him to, and basically hide him at times. And I don't mean hide him like you don't want him on the field, so you're hiding him. I mean hide him from their best blocker, right? Because a lot of the times the left tackle or the right tackle are premium blockers, especially pass blocking on the opponent. So maybe you go in and you attack a guard with Matthew Judon this year, who's weaker in pass protection. Or if the right tackle is worse than the left tackle, then you have him rush over the right tackle. Those are the types of things I think they'll be able to do a little bit more in year 2 with Matthew Judon.
The other thing I would add to that, I think last year, obviously they had him and they had Barmore next to him, right? But they didn't get much off the other edge.
Yeah.
And some of that was stylistic. That guy was kind of a step back, edge setter, pass defender, all of that. But even when they tried to rush from that edge, nobody really made an impact in that spot. And I think this year, the way that they're set up defensively, and I think you look at a growth from a guy maybe like Ronnie Perkins or Josh Uche, they're a little better set up, and this is going to be something to watch. I think that's big in the preseason, how well it works. Can they get pressure from that other side? Because teams were just setting all their protection to the left, right? You leave the back in a block. He's going to be on the left. He's going to help take care of Judon and Barmore. They weren't really worried about the strong side. And if Patriots can make teams worry about the strong side, at least somewhat, it's going to open things up more for Judon on the weak side.
Yeah. All right. So we both had the same number one, right? Mac Jones, number one. Really, the list starts at
he's
number
the quarterback.
2. It's like when you do it when there's a draft, when there's like an Andrew Luck or a Trevor Lawrence, right? It's the draft starts at the number 2 pick. In this list, the draft starts at the number 2 pick because Mac's the number 1 pick. Before we move on to people's questions, I want to ask you one thing about Mac. A lot of social media posts. It's this time of year, right? It's workout season. It's pictures with your shirt off season. There was that picture that floated around social media before the 4th of Mac Jones flexing. I think his girlfriend is the one. Sophia Scott's the one that posted the picture, and he does. It looks like he's Mac Jack, right? Jacked Mac. There we go. He looks huge. He looks like he's in great shape. We know he's been working with Tom House. We know he's been throwing with some of the Patriots receivers all off season long. What do you make of this, though? Is this because I've been sucked into this in the past, and I'm kind of all out on July workout photos. Like, let's see what happens in October, November, December.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to fault him for any of it. It shows he's doing the right things. It shows that he had a good first year and it didn't go to his head and he's still putting the work in. You know, what does it mean from a football standpoint? I don't know. I have to see him on the field, but it's nothing bad. It's not, it's not, I don't know how good it is. We won't know how good it is until we see him, but it's certainly nothing bad. That's just kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely nothing bad. You definitely hear a lot of he's in the best shape of his life and all those types of things for not just Mac, like for all quarterbacks. I think Zach Wilson's the same thing. He's claiming he's in the best shape of his life also in New York. So that's the time of year that we're in, and it's great to see that he's doing the right things. I agree with you there. All right. If you have questions, now's the Q&A portion of the show. Go ahead and drop the questions in the chat. If you just search Jacked Mac Jones or Mac Jones on Twitter, I'm sure you'll see the picture of him flexing in the picture that he posted on Instagram. So go ahead and do that, and you'll find Jacked Mac. Okay. Question.
But leave this window open so you're still watching the show.
Yeah, right. Questions here. We'll start at the top. If you have questions, now's the time. Drop them in the chat, and we'll get to as many as possible. I want to start here with a question from Tanner by TreyvonThornton and his production as a rookie. Here saying, would you be disappointed with 300 to 400 yards as a rookie for TreyvonThornton? Obviously, if that happens, then maybe we start hearing some of another Patriots wide receiver bust. I actually think 300 or 400 yards, given the amount of receivers, including the tight ends that are going to see targets this year, would be the opposite of a bust. Like, that means that I think he's carved out a role for himself of some sort as a rookie. So I'd be pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think also he's a project player. He's an upside player. He's not a guy you expect to break out in year 1. He's a guy you're expecting to break out in year 2 or year 3. On top of that, the depth, like you said, I think that, in my mind, I was kind of 400 to 500 for him. The thing about the N'Keal comp, and I know people aren't going to listen to this, they just want to be mad, and that's fine. But the thing about the N'Keal comp, N'Keal was drafted to be a number 1. N'Keal was drafted to replace Rob Gronkowski's production. He was drafted to come in and immediately be a big part of the offense. That's not why TreyvonThornton's here. They drafted him to be a big part of the offense, but a year or two down the road, when Nelson Aguilar is no longer under contract, when Jacoby Myers is no longer under contract, guys like that, right? Maybe when Kendrick Bourne's no longer under contract, although they should extend him and lock him up. It's another conversation. I think 300 to 400 is about right. Honestly, I think it would be lower, but he's such a deep ball threat. I think his yards per catch is going to be excellent.
Yeah.
I don't think his receptions are going to be what you normally see from a 300 to 400 yard guy. I just think they're going to give him some deep shots and he'll rack up yards like that. So this number, for instance, you give him if he has like an 85-yard touchdown catch, he's basically a quarter of the way to this, right? Maybe
right.
My math
yeah.
sucks.
Yeah.
It could be something like that. So
yeah, I just feel like if he's seeing enough targets to tally 300 plus yards as a rookie, he's got a role. It might not be the most number 1 receiver, might not be a high volume role, but he's out on the field enough to have those targets and to lend to those catches. Field stretching, Maybe like you said, he hits on a couple deep balls. Maybe he's one of those guys that has 25 catches, but his yards per catch is 18, right? Because he's catching all deep balls down the field when he's open. I think that would look like a really good season for TreyvonThornton.
I would say too, like, so this says yards, they're probably going to hand him the ball too a little bit and do some stuff like that. So, if we're talking all-purpose yards, I think that's very realistic. By the way, if you want to call 300 to 400 yards, N'Keal Harry 2.0, N'Keal Harry had 100 yards as a rookie. He has 600 for his career in 3 years. N'Keal Harry's he doesn't even average 300 yards a season. So this season would be much better than anything N'Keal Harry's ever done.
Yeah. Okay. So we just talked about Judon. He's our second most important Patriot for both of us on our list for this season. This is an interesting question, kind of a cap minutia question. So a lot of people, myself included, have theorized the Patriots might use the cap to the base salary to signing bonus conversion trick to free up some cap space using Matthew Judon's contract. The side effect of doing that is you increase future cap hits, right? You kick the can down the road and you increase his future hits. With a player like Matthew Judon, who's already making $18 million a year, increasing those future hits is going to make those cap hits pretty difficult for a release or a trade. Let's say if he drops off a cliff and they want to get out of that contract, this makes it harder. So do you think that could potentially be their thinking if they don't go that route and they don't use Judon's contract, is they don't necessarily want to marry Matthew Judon, right? Because that's what you would be doing if you use this trick with the cap.
Yeah, I maybe. I don't know. I don't talk about the cap. Every time I do, Pat's cap yells at me because I get it wrong. So maybe.
Well, I just put it out for you. It's basically, the question is do you think that he will be worth it to raise his cap hits in, let's say, 2 years, right? Like, will he still be a good enough
I think it would, because the cap's just going to shoot up with the new TV deal, right? But it's also like, I think there's moves you can make, even if you're hesitant to make this move, there's moves you can make before this that make more sense. Extending Jake Bailey. You open up $4 million like that, right? I don't know. I guess if you want to go down that road, but if they need it, there's other ways they can open cap too that make more sense. It's not if they don't want to restructure Judon, like, it just, regardless of what they think about Judon, it makes more sense to extend Jake Bailey than it does to rework Judon's contract. So that's where I'm at. And they still haven't done that.
That's fair. That's fair. All right. Let's go to Jalen Mills, who's your number 3 guy on this list. What is preventing Jalen Mills from being a true number 1 corner? And P asks here, is it his lack of speed as one thing that you could point to that a lot of teams pointed to when he was coming out? I think he was like a 4.6, 4.65 type of guy in the 40. A lot of people at that point are, well, he's a safety, right? Like, automatically when you run a 4.6 or over at the combine, you usually get pigeonholed into safety territory. When you watch his game, though, do you see potential for him to be better than what he has been already in his career and elevate his game to number 1 quarter status? And if not, why?
So, I mean, this goes back to my comparison when we talk, to starting pitchers, right? There's number 1 starters and there's aces. Every team is a number 1. Not every team is an ace. Some teams have more than 1 ace. I don't know that Mills is an ace. You mentioned the speed. I think his instincts, sometimes he trusts himself a little too much. And that, I think he can be a number 1 at times. This, to me, is my biggest issue with his game. It's consistency. I think he shows flashes of being a number 1 corner, but he's not constantly that guy, because, again, I think he can be over aggressive at times and it costs him. Sometimes it works in his favor. Sometimes it doesn't. Guys who are really elite can play that aggressive all the time, and their instincts are at such a high level that they can get away with it. I haven't seen Mills get there quite yet. Like in Philly, he was very up and down, very up and down. He was a little more level last year, which I think is encouraging. But that to me is the next step for Jalen Mills. I think there's a lot about his game to like, but can he bring that for 90% of snaps for 17 weeks? That's been his biggest issue as long as he's been in the league, is on a week-to-week basis, you don't know which Jalen Mills you're going to get. That's something the Patriots are very good at coaching up, is consistency and working with players on. And again, it showed last year. So can he be a number 1? Yeah, I think so, because I've seen him play like a number 1. It's just a matter of him doing it on a week in, week out basis.
Yeah, I think last year he got to the point where he can be a guy that sees 90 targets in the season and holds up, right? He's not going to be a complete anchor to your defense as a regular full-time player on the outside, which with Philadelphia was not the case because they moved him to safety his last year with the Eagles because he couldn't be that kind of player because he was getting exposed as a high volume guy on the outside. I don't necessarily think that he has the hit movement or just the fluidity that you would like to see for a true number one corner to lock on to receivers throughout the route, right? I think that there's some flashes, especially in zone coverage, where he has some nice skill, nice element to his game. But in terms of really being able to stick with receivers throughout the route consistently, especially good receivers like number one corners go up against, I'm not sure if he has those types of elite movement skills. So I guess that might relate back to speed, but it's more than just speed. It's also foot quickness, hip fluidity, just what you look at it when you watch a Stephon Gilmore, for example, and the way that he moves and the way that he can mirror guys. I don't think Jalen Mills is necessarily in that category, but I love his football IQ. And I do think he has pretty good instincts in terms of overall coverage spacing and especially in zone. He handles his responsibilities very well when the Patriots play zone coverage. Man-to-man, if you're going to put him against the right level of competition, he can definitely hold up. When you put him against CeeDee Lamb and man coverage on an island, we see what happens, right? That's sort of where you're at with Jalen Mills right now, which is fine. It's just the Patriots are in a spot where they need him to be maybe a little bit better than that. And I don't necessarily think he can't be if they coach around it and maybe play a little bit more zone this year or protect him a little bit more over the top if he is going up against a CeeDee Lamb level talent, if he is going up against a Tyreek Hill or a Diggs or somebody of that ilk, then you might need to put a little bit more help over there than you would with a true number one guy. But I think that he can be that player that takes number one with safety help, right? I think he can survive there. He's just not a box and one corner, right? He's not like, oh, I got this guy and everybody else worries about the other 10 guys on the field. I don't think we're there yet with Jalen Mills. So talking preseason now, since that's what's the most recent thing that's coming up, or the closest thing that's coming up. So the Rams are one of those teams that rests everybody, right? Sean McVay rests everybody throughout the preseason. I don't think Aaron Donald played a preseason snap last year. I don't think Cooper Kupp did either. They fully shut guys down. The Patriots are the opposite. They play guys throughout the preseason to get them ready and tuned up for the season. I do find it interesting that they have those back-to-back weeks of joint practices in there. They have Carolina joint practices in Foxborough, and then they have the joint practices in Vegas with the Raiders. So they have some opportunities there to get some real live reps for guys in joint practice settings. But if you're running the Patriots, Alex, do you sit guys or do you play them in the preseason?
I mean, I think it's on a case-by-case basis, right? I mean, I look at some of the names here. Devin McCourty's fine. Devin McCourty doesn't need to play. Christian Barmore's a guy. I want him getting all the reps he can get. He's still young. I throw him out there. Judon, after the end of last year, I think he has to play a little bit. I think you got to see where he's at. Maybe you sit him for the third game. Maybe you only play him in the first game, something like that. This is a tough one to answer right now, this early on. And again, I really think it's a player-to-player basis.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Guy like Devin McCourty, I don't need to see.
Devin McCourty doesn't need to play.
I'll see you week one, right? I think Devin McCourty is one of those guys that I'm perfectly comfortable with sitting. I think there's some other guys that maybe fall in that category, like we were just talking about David Andrews, right? I think that he's somebody that I'm perfectly fine with seeing in week one. I understand they might want to play him for continuity purposes and to get that unit to gel a little bit more. But for the most part, I don't really need to see much of David Andrews. And I would say I don't really need to see much of Trent Brown either. Like, I think those two guys, especially with Trent's injury history, the last thing that they need is Trent Brown getting hurt in the preseason. Like, that would be a disaster. So I'm okay with some of those veterans sitting, but I'm with you. Guys like Barmore, Judon, I think after the way he finished last season, I think that those guys playing some series is a good idea. I don't think that they necessarily need to play 3 quarters, but playing maybe a couple of series into the second quarter, first half of a game or something like that, I'm comfortable with. But some of those vets, McCourty, Andrews, whether he's healthy or not, James White, I don't think needs to play a snap in the preseason if he's out there. Those are the types of guys that I think are easy decisions to sit.
But see, a guy like James might want to play. He hasn't seen contact in a year. He may just want to get a couple of drives just to kind of get his rhythm back. So that's where, I think some of it's on the players too. I think there are certain guys, again, like a James White, who's done this long enough that if he says, hey, I need 2 or 3 series to get back in a rhythm, you give him 2 or 3 series to get back in a rhythm. Like, he knows what he needs. So that's the other part of this equation.
Okay, so I love this question. I think this is a great July 5th question. We're in the middle of the offseason. We need something to talk about. This is a great qualifier for that. Out of the second-year QBs, which one would you rather have for the next 10 years? We're not talking about next year. We're not talking about even 2023. But in 2032, when we look back on this quarterback class, who's going to be the best of the lot?
Well, so that's 2 questions. Is this independent of the team they're on? Or is this who's going to have the next best 10 years?
So the way that I look at it, fair enough. The way that I look at it is independent of the team, or assuming they're all on the Patriots, right? Like,
so if we were redrafting this, how would we rank the quarterbacks knowing what we know?
Exactly.
I still take Trevor Lawrence one. I think he's a special talent, and hopefully Jacksonville hasn't ruined him beyond repair. But I still think he's a tremendous talent. Out of Mac 2, out of Justin Fields 3, Davis Mills 4th, Trey Lance 5th.
Oh my goodness, you're such a hater. I love it.
He can't go to the second read. He can't. Remember that pick he threw to Devin McCourty last year? He's looking on the right side. Get open. Get open. It's like triple coverage. Get open. Get open. Get open. Get open. He feels the clock. Get open. He's standing there for like 3-4 seconds. Nope. Well, I wonder what's going on over here. Boom. Right to Devin McCourty.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And look, also, like, all right. I think he's like a fine prospect, but he went 2nd overall. He went ahead of Justin Fields. He went ahead of Mac Jones.
Yeah.
And there was all this hype. Like, people were pushing him up against Lawrence. And I'm talking about Zach Wilson, if I realized I never actually said his name.
Yeah.
BYU's quarterback last year in this upcoming season is a guy named Jaren Hall. And I think Jaren Hall right now is a projected 2nd, 3rd round pick. He might sneak into the back end of the 1st. He has a really good year this year. I watched Jaren Hall, and I think Jaren Hall is a fine prospect. Jaren Hall, though, I don't see anything that Zach Wilson did that Jaren Hall doesn't do. I actually think they're very similar. And I've yet to get a real answer to the question, what is the difference between Zach Wilson and Jaren Hall? Because I think they're comparable players, but Jaren Hall isn't in the discussion for the 1st overall pick right now. And I know it's a great quarterback class.
Zach Wilson wasn't in the conversation this time before his last season at BYU, to be fair.
That's fair, but I'm very interested to see kind of what the narrative is around Jaren Hall, because I don't see much of a difference. I really don't. Zach Wilson's maybe a little more elusive, but is that, worth 60 picks in the draft? I don't know. So I don't think so. So yeah, I still just don't see it. I don't see it. I'm
with you on Zach. We've been on the same page with this one.
He made the throw. He made the pro day throw. He looks great in shorts. He's shown me nothing beyond that.
Yeah, we disagreed on a quite a few fronts with this quarterback class, the 2021 quarterback class. The one thing that we were consistently both on the same page on was the Zach Wilson thing, which was just not seeing it, thinking he's a little bit overhyped. I even went as far, I believe, before the draft, saying that I didn't really see a big difference between Zach Wilson and Sam Darnold. I kind of just thought the Jets were starting the clock again on Sam Darnold 2.0, which I can understand from a contractual standpoint maybe, but beyond that, from a skill standpoint, I really didn't see a big difference with Zach Wilson. I agree that Trevor Lawrence has to still be the number 1 pick. I think if you gave him to the Patriots, he'd be special. I think he's got that kind of talent and that
nature
ability.
Versus nurture.
Right. The Jaguars are just a dumpster fire, especially his rookie season with Urban and all of the things that happened with that organization. Just an absolute mess. So I still go Trevor Lawrence number 1. I would also go Mac Jones number 2. I think Justin Fields still has a higher ceiling than Mac Jones does with potential, but I think the floor is so high with Mac that for the next 10 years, you're going to have good to great quarterback play at that position for a decade if he stays healthy, and this is true with everybody staying healthy. So for that reason, I go with the consistency of Mac over the variance of Justin Fields. I think other teams and other talent evaluators in the league might look at that differently because they say, like, just go for the home run, right? Go for, if you're going to swing, go for the seats and go with the guy like Justin Fields. I tend to lean towards Mac for that reason at this point, which is probably the case coming into the draft that we knew as well. I just don't know if we knew how high Mac's floor truly was, right? Like, I think we knew that he was going to have a high floor, but was it going to be Pro Bowl high floor, or was it going to be middling quarterback high floor? Now that we know it's probably going to be Pro Bowl caliber floor, then we know that we can put him ahead of Justin Fields. I still put Justin Fields number 3. I still am a big Fields believer. I wanted him for the Patriots. He almost fell to them. It would have been really interesting to see if Fields and Mac were still on the board at 15. I tend to think the Patriots still go Mac because he's their type of guy, and Fields isn't. But it would have been interesting to see what decision they would have made there. I still go Justin Fields 3 after Mac. Can I say like not applicable for Trey Lance? Because I have no idea what Trey Lance is. Like, I love Trey Lance coming out of college.
That's another nature versus nurture thing. It really feels like San Francisco's kind of ruined him, right?
Maybe, or maybe he's Patrick Mahomes. Like, who knows, right? Like,
but no, where can he be at mentally right now? Like with Mahomes, it was clear you're going to sit behind Alex Smith for a year, and he sat. You're going to move on. Lance has been in and out, and then Jimmy Garoppolo was going to get traded, and then he wasn't going to get traded. Like, that's. We talked about in the spring how much it meant that Mac was the ingrained starter this year, right? And what a benefit was that to him. Trey Lance isn't the starter or the backup. We don't know.
Yeah,
we don't know. So that can't be easy for him. And in the comments, it's a good point. If he can't beat out Jimmy Garoppolo, it's not exactly a great sign.
So I don't think that it's that he can't beat out Jimmy Garoppolo. I think that Kyle Shanahan might look for things.
Okay, that's fair.
In his quarterbacks. I think
you're being too nice there. You're being too nice there. I think what you're trying to say is Kyle Shanahan might not be a good coach.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Evan. You're explaining away him not going with the better quarterback.
I'm explaining
the coach that goes with the worst quarterback is not a good coach. It's the most important position on the field.
That certain coaches have parameters or types of quarterbacks that they want to roll with.
Okay.
And this, I still go back to the point with the Niners that I fully think that Kyle Shanahan wanted Mac Jones. I fully believe that. And I think that the front office wanted the talent, right? They wanted the next Patrick Mahomes, the next Josh Allen, and they took Trey Lance in that spot instead because it's two different conversations, right? The coaches, especially a guy like Kyle Shanahan, and I think this is similar with the Patriots, and I'm going to use a Madden analogy for you, even Alex. They just want the guy that's going to hit the right button on the controller, right? Like when they go through the progression and they see the field, they just want the guy to hit X when X is open and to hit Y when Y is open and just do it that way. And Jimmy Garoppolo, for all of his shortcomings, for all of his durability concerns, when he plays, the Niners offense is efficient. It runs the right way and he presses the right buttons. Evaluators look for ceiling. And they look for guys that are going to elevate the scheme beyond XYZ. I think Kyle Shanahan falls into the category, and I think Bill falls into this category, and I think Josh McDaniels falls into this category, that they just want the guy to press the right buttons on the controller, and they'll take care of the rest. The scheme is going to elevate the quarterback instead of the other way around. So I think Kyle is hung up on Jimmy G because he knows what they can be with Jimmy G, and I don't know if he wants to coach up Trey Lance to fit his offense. And I don't think he's going to change the scheme to fit Trey Lance.
So the conversation we were having, though, I said, if he can't beat out Jimmy Garoppolo, and you said, what if you basically said, well, what if he has, but Shanahan isn't going with him? If he's proven to be better than Garoppolo and Shanahan's still going with Garoppolo.
But he might be more talented than Garoppolo, but he might not be better than Garoppolo and Shanahan's system.
Niche reference, season 3 of Blue Mountain State, Marcus Gilday. They get this offensive coordinator, Marcus Gilday, and he basically the whole season is him basically saying he can put any player he wants into his offense. Like, he doesn't care about the quarterback. He can put any player he wants into his system.
Look at it that way a little bit.
Honestly. No, I don't think so.
Not with Brady. This is not like a knock on Brady, but I do think that some of those whispers that came out, like they feel like they could win with a top 15 quarterback. I believe that.
Then why didn't they wait and take Davis Mills?
Because I think the difference between that Mac and Davis Mills is enough. You had Davis Mills ahead of Zach Wilson. I wouldn't have Davis Mills ahead of Zach Wilson.
Based on what we saw last year, I would. And I wasn't a big Davis Mills guy. I had Trask. I had Trask as my 6th quarterback on the board.
I think I did too. I had Davis Mills right after Trask. I like Davis Mills' peaks, but I know that Davis Mills' lows, his highs are high and his lows are extremely low. And I don't know if even in the NFL, if he's ever going to find that consistent play through and through. So I'm not buying the day. I think the Davis Mills hype is way overblown. I think we're getting a little bit out of control with some of the things I see about some of the takes I see out there about Davis Mills. He put together good tape at Stanford at times. Like, this is Davis Mills, right? Like, he can be a good quarterback, but then you watch it when it falls off the wagon, right? Watch when a wheel falls off and see what happens, because he becomes a completely different guy. And that's exactly what he was like at Stanford. At times he looked like he was a Heisman Trophy candidate. And then at other times he looked like he was a 7th round, priority free agent type of pick. So I'm not sold on Davis Mills. I still have Wilson ahead of Mills, but our top 3 is the same, right? Trevor,
Right.
Mac, Justin Fields. Like, I think that's become the consensus, and we'll see with Trey Lance. I'm not ready to write off Trey Lance. We'll see.
Honestly, if you want to flip Mac and Fields, you can, but that's what it should have been last year. It should have been Trevor Lawrence, number 1, and then in some order, Mac Jones and Justin Fields, 2 and 3.
Yeah, the Jets were always taking Zach Wilson, but I do think that Mac could have gone in the Trey Lance spot if Kyle Shanahan had gotten his way. I really do. So that's a great way of looking at it, though, because I do think that there's 2 different conversations. Who was the best quarterback on tape last year? It's Mac Jones, right? Out of this rookie class, it was Mac Jones. Who's the best quarterback for the 2022 season? It might still be Mac Jones, but 10 years from now, I think we might have a different conversation looking back on it.
If you're starting a team right now and you have to pick one, who are you picking to build around? Like, that's how I look at it. And it's still Lawrence, because I still think he's a generational talent. Urban Meyer's just a generationally bad coach.
He's a generational idiot is what he is. All right. Cool. Let's move on to some wide receiver questions that people have. We've talked a lot about Trey Nixon during minicamp. We haven't really talked about him much recently, just because we talked about him so much during minicamp. Right. Well, where's your meter on Trey Nixon making this team right now? Is it at all the way yes or all the way no? Where are you at?
So when I did my roster projection, I had him as the 54th player. So that's the first guy to, like, if you would expand the roster by one guy, I would put Trey Nixon on. To me, Trey Nixon making the team, it comes down to 2 questions. First question, are they going to keep 6 wide receivers? Right? There's 5 guys outside of something, if Thornton totally pops off and they trade Aguilar, that changes the picture. But outside of that, it's Aguilar, Bourne, Myers, Parker, Thornton. They're keeping those 5. And Matthew Slater, we're not counting him in this. He's his own thing. He's special teams. Right? So are they going to keep a 6th wide receiver? That comes down to, what the running back position looks like. Does a 3rd tight end emerge as a guy that's worth keeping? Right now, I don't think there is. How many offensive linemen are they going to keep? How many corner? Like, that question goes to the whole roster. The second question, if they are going to keep 6 receivers, it comes down to, what do they want? What do they want from that roster spot? If they want speed and they want depth in the slot, Trey Nixon's the guy. But as much as he gives you that, I think a guy like Lil Jordan Humphrey gives you size, right? And a physical presence. And it's not necessarily one's better than the other. It's simply, how do you want to round out your roster? What skill set do you want? There's a good chance, 6th wide receiver, they just want a guy who's going to play special teams, because that guy's not going to get a ton of snaps on offense. If that's the case, you want Christian Wilkerson. He's a really good special teams player. He's not a horrible receiver. If his hands were better, I think he'd be on the team. He needs to work on catching the ball a little bit, but, like, you go that way, right? If they want that. If they want, more versatility, and then I guess you could put a 3rd question in this. Is Ty Montgomery a running back or a wide receiver?
Right.
Because there's value to keeping him on the roster. He can play in the slot. He can be your pass catching running back. He can play special teams. If they view him as a running back, that probably helps Trey Nixon's case. If they view him as a wide receiver, well, now Trey Nixon, I think there's a good chance Montgomery makes it. Now Trey Nixon becomes your 7th wide receiver. And that now you're really pushing it. So we talk about the at-large spots, right, on the roster, and this is something I've discussed. It's basically, there's 53 roster spots to be won, but at least 2 have to be won by quarterbacks, right? Your backup quarterback may not be a top 53 player on your roster, but you got to keep a backup quarterback. So now the 53rd best player by true talent falls off, right? Maybe you have, based on positional minimums, and not a lot of teams do this, but you have to keep at least 4 wide receivers just to get through the season. You need 4 wide receivers on your roster. Well, maybe you're like the Patriots and you have 5 wide receivers that are roster locks. That takes away a spot. That takes away an at-large spot. So once you get to your positional minimums and add in the roster locks, how many spots are there really to be won? And I've calculated this for this team this year, and I think it's between 5 and 7. So the question is, outside of the positional minimums and roster locks, can Trey Nixon be a top 5 to 7 player? He's right there on that border.
So I remember when they drafted him having this conversation, probably right on this channel, about his lack of special teams exposure, right? He doesn't return. Right. He doesn't play in the kicking game, covering kicks. In minicamp, they had him working on punt returns. I do think he has some of that slitheriness and some of that explosiveness to return punts if he can learn the technique and learn this position. So maybe he has some potential there. Obviously, he's got a good guy in Troy Brown to teach him, right? So maybe they can untap that return ability that he wasn't used at UCF. The thing is with Nixon that I see is his way onto the roster is if he plays so well throughout camp and preseason that they don't want to risk putting him on waivers. And maybe they cut Brian Hoyer or they cut Nick Folk again, and they do these wonky things with the veterans, right? Where they say, Justin Bethel, we're going to release you, but you're actually going to be on the game day roster. Don't worry about it. We just need a roster spot for you, right? So they go that route with it. And maybe Trey Nixon does play himself into a spot where it's worth cutting Brian Hoyer to free up a roster spot for Trey Nixon and then sign Brian Hoyer off the practice squad for a couple of weeks until somebody gets hurt to be the backup quarterback to Mac Jones. I think that there's a chance that Trey Nixon's that good. I do. I don't want to go Maurice Harris, right? I don't want to overrate him from minicamp practices without pads. But from what we saw in minicamp, from what we saw in his college tape as well, I liked the skill and the talent that he showed in college too. I thought it was a nice find in the 7th round. So I like what I'm seeing, and I think it's worth keeping him around. They're going to have to get creative with it, though, as you just laid out with the at-large spots. They're going to have to get a little creative with how they find a way for him onto the roster. But to me, I do think it's going to be worth it to maybe cut Brian Hoyer or to cut one of the special teams guys that doesn't have a lot of guaranteed money. I don't know what Bethel's contract situation is. I just threw that out there. You know, one of these guys that isn't necessarily going to be snatched up by another team or doesn't have to go through waivers because he's a veteran. Right. Those are the positions that you really look at.
Except they haven't been afraid to lose those guys in the past, right? Austin Carr, Braxton Berrios. So the one thing I'll say about special teams, assuming Marcus Jones is healthy, he's your returner. Yeah. You're not going to draft Marcus Jones and not have him return punts. Right. So to me, the thing to watch with Trey Nixon is he covering kicks. Yeah. Like if he's out there in the preseason and he is covering kicks, he has a really good shot to make the roster. Because again, I just talked about it, right? What do they want? Do they want size? Do they want speed? Do they want special teams ability? Well, right now, Christian Wilkerson's the special teams guy. But if Trey Nixon can kind of show he can cover kicks, well, that puts Christian Wilkerson out of the conversation. And now it's, do they want the speed of Trey Nixon or do they want the size of Lil Jordan Humphrey? And I think unless they really want that size and that, you know, maybe they see that as a way of keeping a third tight end and keeping Humphrey, unless they really, really want that, which I don't think they will because it's not something they've ever prioritized, Nixon suddenly has a really good shot.
So let's revisit this. We're going to revisit this plenty, I'm sure, throughout training camp, pretty much every day in training camp. But I think the real time to revisit it is after that Carolina preseason game, after the joint practices with the Panthers, because no offense to the Patriots secondary, we're still not 100% sold on this cornerback group. So let's see him go up against some other corners from other teams in pads, right, and see what he can do then against some of those guys. Carolina's got some good corners. The Raiders have some good corners. I mean, nobody's like Deion Sanders on either one of those teams, but they have some guys that can play. So let's see what happens then. But I'm on the Trey Nixon bandwagon. I just have learned from my mistakes, a la Maurice Harris, to not overrate minicamp practices just yet. But I think we both would like to see them find a way to keep Trey Nixon on the team if they can. It's just a matter of not if they can. It's a tough one. Right. A few years ago, which 2019 was Gunner's rookie year, didn't he get told that he was cut and then they called him back later and said we actually found a way to keep you? Yeah. So he's right there with Gunner, right? The 54th guy, 53rd guy, something like that. It's going to be tight. All right, one more wide receiver question here. A lot of questions today, Alex, in the chat about Devante Parker. I think people are excited about Devante Parker, a true bona fide outside receiver that's got Pro Bowl caliber, Pro Bowl level tape, quite frankly. 2019 was a Pro Bowl season for him. It's been a little while since they had a guy with a proven track record to play the outside like Devante Parker has. What are your expectations for Parker, if you want to put that into stats, if you want to just talk about it from a big picture standpoint? Where are you at with Devante Parker?
I think he can be a 1,000-yard guy if he plays 17 games. Now, that's a big if. The one thing I'll say about Parker's injury concerns that stands out, he's only played one full season in, I think, 5 seasons in the league, right? But he's never played less than 10 games, right? Remember, that was the thing with Gronk. It felt like he was going to play 16 games or like 2. There was no in between. Parker's going to be out there more often than not. It's just he's not. There's no lock. He's going to be out there the entire time. So to me, I think for him, and we talked about this a little bit last week when we did the Deion Branch recap, right? They've just got to be. They need their passing game has to have more options in the red zone. It can't just be Hunter Henry. That's where I'm looking for Devante Parker to make a difference. I wouldn't be surprised if his yardage number, and I know I just said I think he can be a 1,000-yard guy, but like if he's lower on yards, I get it, right? They have guys that they like to eat up the middle of the field with, whether it's Jacoby Myers, whether it's whoever the third down back is. We think if they're going to be Shanahan-y on offense, Jonnu Smith could be some of that.
Yeah.
So catches, yards. I'm looking at Devante Parker's touchdown number.
Yeah.
That's where I think he can really make the most difference from last year to this year. Overall, he's a good addition. He'll help them everywhere. But I think where you'll see him impacting them the most, where it will look the most different from how it did last year, is in the red zone.
Yeah, it's a great point because that's exactly where they were hoping, even when it was clear that N'Keal was not going to be like a bona fide stud, it wasn't going to be an all-pro type receiver. I think they were hoping that he was going to evolve to at least being somewhat of a red zone threat that they could use down by the goal line on fades, back shoulders, box out type of plays like they used Hunter Henry a lot of the time last year. So if they can get a second guy, like you said, they have the running game down there, which is usually pretty good. They have Hunter Henry to go to down there. If they can have a third option in Devante Parker, that would be really big for their offense. I don't think that he's going to be a big yardage guy. I think if he has 500, 600 yards this year, it's a good number for him, honestly. Because like you said, Myers, the tight ends, Kendrick Bourne, I think those guys are going to get force-fed targets a lot of the time. I think Kendrick Bourne has a chance to be a 100-plus target guy this year. I don't know if the targets are going to be there on high point fades down the sideline where he's trying to out-jump a guy. How many times is Mac Jones really going to throw that ball to Devante Parker? I don't think it's going to be 100-plus, right? So I'm not sure the yards will be there. The red zone production, I think, will be there. The threat of him being on the field, I think, is important just as a guy that has some reputation and has some gravity towards him in terms of how they structure your defense or your game plan against the Patriots. I think that will be key. And you mentioned his health. The one thing that he mentioned in minicamp that I thought was interesting was about how much he's running, sprinting, long distance type running, hill running with the Patriots versus what he did with the Miami Dolphins. So my guess is yes, this is partially just the Patriots program and that's what they do. But I would also think that they probably got with Parker after the trade and got with his camp, his trainers and stuff like that and said, hey, it's mostly been soft tissue stuff. It's mostly been hamstrings, things like that. Here's what we think that we could do to maybe help him stay on the field. Do you guys agree with this method? And I think they have a plan in place, at least hopefully, to be proactive about the fact that he is prone to hamstring pulls and things of that nature, but rather than being reactive to it, which is obviously the way that you want to go in any sport.
Well, the other thing, too, to remember, we did this last year with Hunter Henry, and then he played a full season. And you've got to remember, not every team handles their medical staff differently. And Hunter Henry, when he was asked at the end of the year about playing a full season, attributed a lot of that to how the Patriots training staff kind of shook up his regimen. Yeah. So just because the guy's injury prone in one place, especially like you said, when it's pulls and things like that. Yeah. That might not be an issue elsewhere. There might be another training staff that has a better read on that. So I said it last year with Hunter Henry. I'm going to say it again. I'm not saying it's a non-issue, the injuries, but I'm not as worried as I think some people are. I think it's a little over discussed.
It's easy to agree with you because of Hunter Henry. I think that's a great example, right? This is a guy that came in, maybe not as much soft tissue with Hunter Henry. I mean, I guess is an ACL considered soft tissue? I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but Hunter Henry had a lot of freak injuries, right? Where like he's in like mini camp torn ACLs and like things like that came out of nowhere. Whereas Parker is more of like a nagging injury type of guy versus like a serious season ending type of injury. So I'm pretty sure that he's played in a good number of games each year. It's just sometimes he misses 3 games here, 4 games there, that sort of thing, because he's pulling hammies or quads or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I think the Patriots do a great job of kind of managing some of these injury prone type of players in the past. And Hunter Henry is a good one. And hopefully Devante Parker is another guy that can improve that on that this year. I know last year, it was great to hear from Hunter Henry about how great it was to play the whole year. Like that was so important to him. And it was pretty awesome to hear that and see it happen. All right. That does it for our Q&A here today. If you didn't get your question answered, you can always come back to our future Q&As and we'll answer as many more questions or your question if we didn't get to it today as we can then. So don't worry, we'll do more of these in the future and you can ask your question then. Before we wrap up, we do have to do the Boston Sports Minute. It's now a tradition. And we can go in a couple of different directions with this one. We haven't talked about a couple of things here. The Red Sox are the active team, so I think we should start there, Alex. And I've been wavering. You know, I want to be on the Red Sox. I want to say it. I want to be all in with the Red Sox, but sometimes they look like a great team. Sometimes they look like a bad team, and you're telling me that that's just kind of who they are, which is not too exciting.
Yeah, I said this. I think that they are good enough to beat bad teams, but they're not bad enough to beat good teams. And again, the Cubs aren't a good team. They lost 3 of 4. Big win last night against the Rays. They still haven't shown me enough consistently against good teams to be excited, right? And they're still, I think like 8-20 now against the AL East, which is not good. That's just not going to do it. I am excited for Brian Bayo. There's nothing like the hype, when you have like a top 3 starting pitching prospect and he makes his debut. Love that. So that's going to be fun. But yeah, I still think, they're going to compete for that last wild card spot, one and done. They're going to need to make some major moves at the deadline if they want to compete.
Yeah, I love the Brian Bella call up. I said this to you earlier when we were texting about the Red Sox. If their rotation looks like Sale, Evaldi, one of the young guys, Pivetta and Waka, like that's a pretty good rotation for the second half of the season, right? I mean, I think that's pretty strong. I know I'm assuming that Chris Sale is Chris Sale, but even if he's 75% as good as he was, he doesn't necessarily have to be peak Cy Young Chris Sale. Even if he's just a better than average pitcher, then that's, he's still Chris Sale. I like that rotation. I'm excited for Bello. I think this kid's going to be good. He throws like 98 on the fastball.
So it's Bayo. Bayo, by the way.
Okay. Bayo. Nasty fastball, 98. Was a changeup slider. I think are like his 3 main pitches.
His changeup's his best pitch. His changeup is a plus pitch. I think it's great. So when they do baseball prospects, it's a 20 to 80 scale, right? So everything's good. 20 is nobody gets 20s. 20 is just the basement. 80 is like elite stuff. And it's 2 ratings. So you get a current rating and a potential rating. So a guy might be like, for instance, if you're doing a hitter, right? Contact might be like a 40-70. So he's a little below average right now, but like he's going to be an above average contact hitter. I think Bayo's, and it's by increments of 5. I think Bayo's changeup grades out at 75 right now.
Yeah.
That's his gimme pitch. His fastball is going to sit in the mid to high 90s. I don't think he quite hits triple digits, but he's got the stuff. Long term, he probably needs to add a 4th pitch. And once everybody does get healthy, he'll probably be back in the bullpen. He'll probably be in the bullpen towards the end of this year. But yeah, there's a lot to be excited about with him long term.
Yeah, he looks like a stud. I'm excited to watch him pitch tomorrow night. Let's move on to the Celtics. We haven't talked much Celtics since they traded for Malcolm Brogdon, signed Gallo. I think we can start with Brogdon. I think the biggest question with Brogdon is not necessarily is it a good move. I think we're all on board with the move. It was a great trade by Brad Stevens. It's more what's his role? Is he in the starting 5? Is he a premium bench player? Is he a point guard? What is he doing with Marcus Smart? What's his outlook on the Celtics, I think we're all on board with the fact that they went and got him, though.
Yeah. No, I mean, the Celtics are a better team now than the last time we did a show, right?
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what it's about. Yeah. I still think they need, like, I think they have their postseason rotation set, right? Yeah. They can go like 8-9 deep in the postseason right now. I don't know if they would do that, but they can. The thing to me where they have to round it off is, like, they traded Tice, right?
Yeah.
They need another center who can eat minutes in the regular season so Robert Williams doesn't have to play as much, right? And maybe that's I forget, kid from Purdue.
Thomas Robinson?
No. He's you're thinking of Thomas Bryant, who's a UDFA who they could sign for the minimum. Yeah. There was a kid they signed, a UDFA from Purdue, who's going to be on their summer league team, who I really liked. I thought they might take in the draft. And his name is, I don't know if you can tell that I'm stalling here. And of course, he's at the bottom of the roster, Trevion Williams, who's kind of like a Robert Williams light. He's not huge for a center. He's, 6'10", 250, but he's incredibly athletic. So whether it's somebody like that, whether it's Thomas Bryant, whoever, I'd like to see them add, I know people are going to roll their eyes on this, another regular season point guard just to manage the minutes of some of those guys. Marcus Smart plays hurt a ton. He shouldn't have to do that. Give him the time to heal that he needs to heal. But those are regular season things, right? Now you're talking about how can you be in the best position once you get to the playoffs. It's a luxury to kind of have those conversations, but we can now based on the run the Celtics had last year. So that's really all I'm looking for them to add at this point. I think Brad's done a really good job. As for Kevin Durant, if he says, I only want to go to Boston, I think you make a move because you're going to get him at a discount. Phoenix can offer more. Golden State can offer more. The Lakers can offer more. Dallas can offer more.
To be fair, the Celtics can offer more, but do the Celtics want to offer more? Right? Like the Celtics, the talk, to me, where it loses me on all these talk radio shows, is when the question is, would you trade Jaylen Brown for Kevin Durant? Full stop, no. Like, no one's trading Jaylen Brown for Kevin Durant. And if you're Kevin Durant, you don't want to trade Jaylen Brown off the team that you're going to. You want to play with Jaylen Brown, right? Like, the question is can the Celtics put together a package of their secondary guys, right? Smart, Rob, Grant Williams, like that's the guys that they're picking from. Like, let's stop it with the Jays getting into the Jaylen Brown, getting into the Kevin Durant trade. Like that's absolutely ridiculous. And I don't think that's even on the table for Brad Stevens at this point.
Which again, to me, it goes back to if Durant's going to force his way here, then that's how you can do it without giving up Brown. If he's not going to force his way here, just leave it alone.
Yeah.
I hope he doesn't go to Miami. That's I think the Celtics are fine as long as he doesn't go to Miami.
Yeah. It drives me nuts that Jaylen Brown's even in this conversation. Like, that's just, why would you do that? I
think it's a testament to Jaylen Brown. If I'm Jaylen Brown, I'm taking that as a compliment.
Absolutely.
People think you're good enough to be swapped for Kevin Durant straight up. Like,
that's fair.
That's pretty cool.
He's 25 years old. Should have been an all-star last year. He's going to be an all-star next year. He has potential to be an all-NBA player. Not maybe first-team all-NBA, but like third-team all-NBA. Jaylen Brown is potentially there for him. And he's 8 years younger than Kevin Durant. So I just am not touching either one of the Jays. If they can make it work because Durant really wants to come here and they can make it work, like you said, with all the other guys that are on their roster, then fine. But the Jays are not going anywhere. I'm okay with them not being super interested in Kevin Durant. Not that that's like a hot take or anything, but I'm fine with them going after it again with the roster that they have. I love Brogdon. I think it takes some of the playmaking, scoring. I think when people hear playmaking, they always think of like assist guys, right? Like a Steve Nash or like a Rondo or somebody that's just setting everybody up, right? He gets to the hoop really well. He shoots well. I think that his scoring ability on offense will hopefully take some of the pressure off the Jays where they have a true third scorer. I think the team last year, they had guys that could get hot, like Marcus or like Al, but they didn't have a guy that was consistently a true third scorer on that team. Now, I think with Brogdon, hopefully he stays healthy. I think he can be a true third scorer for the Celtics, which will be critical for them. I'm with you with getting some more depth to limit the minutes that Rob plays. Honestly, I would limit some of the minutes Brogdon plays because he's pretty injury prone at times too. Brogdon to me is a signing for May and June. Signing to put you over the top, or trade, excuse me, to put you over the top. It's really not about getting the 1 seed in the East. It's about you needed one more scorer, and he's that one more scorer. And hopefully the finals goes different this time around because you have a piece like Brogdon. So great trade by Brad. Gallo's not the defensive stopper that maybe you wanted, but he's another wing.
They have enough defense. They need to score.
Yeah.
People keep saying, oh, he doesn't play defense. When you're so good defensively, you can afford to maybe add a guy that doesn't play defense.
Yeah. So he's a guy that is another wing, which is what they needed. They needed somebody that could eat up minutes and give Jalen and Jason a breather at times. And I think Gallo's capable of doing that. So that's all good with me as well. So all good things for the Celtics. They really stealth mode a little bit there from Brad Stevens. The Brogdon trade came out of nowhere a little bit. And some of the
I called it. I knew that was coming because I said, I booked a tea time Friday at noon. I said the Celtics are going to make the trade while I'm out on the course, and it's exactly what happened.
Well, everybody else in the NBA news cycle is looking at KD. They're looking at the Brooklyn situation, and all of a sudden Brad Stevens on a Friday afternoon makes probably the most shrewd move of the NBA offseason so far by basically stealing Malcolm Brogdon for pennies on the dollar for Aaron Nesmith and Daniel Tice. Like, see you later, right? So That was a great trade. Bruins really quickly. Jim Montgomery, is he officially the coach yet? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think they made it official.
Did they make it official? All right, I hadn't seen the official press release. Jim Montgomery, really good coach, had some off the ice issues, personal matters, that type of thing that knocked him off course, but he's been successful everywhere he's gone, both at the college level and with the Dallas Stars before some of the things happened with him off the ice. A smart hockey guy, it sounds like, was really good with the Blues as assistant on the power play. It's a Steve Sarkisian situation, right? Like if he keeps it on the, if they can keep him together, he's a really good hockey mind. And I think he's a decent hire as long as everything goes well off the ice.
Well, it comes down to two things for me why I can't get excited about it. First off, I don't think he's a better coach than Cassidy.
Yeah.
Right? You let the better coach go. And it's still a front office thing. You know, he still needs the pieces. He still needs the tools to, you talk about him being great hockey mind. I don't think he's a bad hire, you know, to not have a coach and go to hit. Like, you're in good shape. I think they would have been better off staying with Cassidy. I think they're all right now. But you got to get him the pieces. There's a report out today that the Bruins are trying to trade up into the back end of the first round.
Yeah.
I don't entirely get that because those guys usually don't play year one, and it feels like they should be in win now mode with Bergeron coming back. There's another report out there that they're going to look to spend big money on a center. I don't know where that money's coming from.
Yeah.
So that would probably hint at a number of different moves. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do, but at least you have one big piece of the puzzle in place now in the fact that they have a coach.
Whether I agree with every move the Bruins make or not over the next couple of weeks, they should be very, very active in this offseason because they got to move some chips around, right? Like, clearly their team isn't good enough. So whether they're going full tank rebuild mode for a year or two, or they're trying to move some money around to free up some money to go after a legitimate second line center or somebody to elevate the back end along with McAvoy and Lindholm, they got to make some moves, whether one way or another. Like, there has to be a clear direction of the team of trying to improve either in the short term or taking the long-term view at it. If they just re-sign Bergeron, and I think there's a chance they might bring Krejci back now that Cassidy's gone, and try to go back and run it back with this crew, right? With this core.
Yeah.
And just because he missed the season with the Bruins, Krejci is still a part of the core, right? Like, that's still a core player.
Right.
I feel like that's a recipe for another bounce in the first round as a 7 or an 8 seed by a much better team, right? That's clearly going nowhere if you're the Bruins. So either swing big or go backwards, right? Like, those are the two options, I think, for the Bruins at this point.
Sure.
All right. You can go and follow Alex's. You'll have some Bruins coverage, I'm sure. You're going to do some.
Well, Matt and Ty crushed that. They don't really need me, but 98.5thesportshub.com. I mean, Ty's got some stuff up today, so check that out. And again, 98.5thesportshub.com.
Yeah, and Evan Marinofsky does a great job for us on CLNS covering the Bruins as well. And Connor Ryan with BSJ. So a lot of good Bruins follows in town that you can go ahead and get some more. I'm going to say on my part, I'm going to speak for myself, not for Alex, some more educated opinions on the Bruins. Go read those guys and not listen to us, Jamokes. All right. we're going to wrap it up here for the hour. And we really appreciate everybody listening to us today on this post July 4th hangover show of ours here today. Appreciate everybody that asked the questions. We'll be back on Thursday for another Throwback Thursday. That's going to be our last Throwback Thursday. And of course, now here comes the bots into the chat right as we're about to wrap this thing up. The Throwback Thursday on Thursday will be our last one of the offseason. Then we're going to get into some training camp preview stuff and really get into the nitty gritty as we head towards training camp. So Throwback Thursday on Thursday in a couple days, and then training camp preview stuff from that point on. So really looking forward to it, and you can keep it right here on Patriots Beat for all your Patriots training camp coverage. So until then, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you Thursday.